side of the table.
All right. Also,
Nobody wants to sit next to me. Okay, thank you.
there we go.
Usually Jim Beer sits next to me in order to keep me in line, or vice
Oh,
versa,
yikes.
as we.
You're in trouble.
We're a little out of our norm today.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I am. This is going to be an informal working group meeting, and I'm quite excited to have a chance for us to dive in a little bit, dive in deeper into the whole issue of transit and transportation. And I'm not exactly sure who's going to be our facilitator today.
SRF is,
Okay.
and Richard, so maybe Richard, if you wanted to kick us off and then.
Sure.
Well, maybe we could just go around and introduce everybody. However you want to do that, Richard, that'd be great.
Like me to start?
Sure.
I'm Richard Fries, Director of Public Works and City Engineer.
Where are we going?
Which way are we going to go?
Tom Brennan with Nelson Nygaard, part of the team working on this. I was also the transportation project manager for the initial study.
Hello, I'm Joni with SRF Consulting Group, and I am the project coordinator for the city loop aspect of this project.
And I'm Beth Bartz with SRF Consulting Group, and my role is sort of an overall coordinator of all the various studies.
Ryback from the DMC.
And I'm Tina Smith from the DMC.
Mark Hickey, City Council.
Jim Beer, County Board, DMC.
Ardell Brady, Mayor, DMC.
Kathleen Lamb.
Lawyer for the DMCC.
Lisa Clark with DMC EDA.
Patrick C. with DMC EDA. Doug Holton, Mayor Clinic, Department Chair for Facilities. Jim Siegfried.
I'm Maurice Yar with Transit Options. Charlie Ryder from the City Planning Department.
Craig Vaughn with SRF Consulting Group, serving as the Parking and Transportation Management Authority Study Coordinator.
Jonette Kunow with Kimley Horn, working on the street use study.
Patrick Corkle with SRF Consulting Group. I am the coordinator for the street use study.
Mona Elabadi with SRF Consulting, leading the transit circulator components of the study.
Thank you. I want to assure the board that this type of segregation is not going on right now. Where Mayo sits on one side of the room and the city's on the other side. These are integrated transportation studies, and the assistance and support we've been getting from the Mayo staff all the way through this is very much appreciated. I'm just going to start off by at the top of the agenda. We identified 2 workshop goals. We really appreciate the board taking time out of their busy schedule to come and talk to us about what we're doing. We found, I think, the whole process at the formal board meetings to be a little stuffy, if you will, and very difficult to for us to get.
I'll blame that on Robert's rules and
But time constraints and everything else would make it difficult for us to dive into the details. So I appreciate the board's support for doing this workshop. We really want this to be hands-on today. We apologize for the fact that if you were expecting a packet of 100 pages, you didn't get that. We want you to touch and feel and talk to us and mark on the drawings and stuff today. What we want is your input to narrow the current scenarios to something less than 6. We're going to be talking about in our milestone schedule in a month we want to be to 3. So we'd like some feedback from you today on how we get from 6 to 3. And again, identify any red flags that you have about anything that we have to present today. Anything that doesn't feel right, anything you think we need to evaluate further. Now is the time for us to do that, not in July or September when we get so far down the road that we're going to have a serious impact on the schedule. So that's our goal today, is to basically interact with you, answer all of your questions, provide you some rationale on how we got here, and some suggestions and guidance on how we get to the next step.
So with that, maybe I'll just kind of give us all a run through the agenda and what we're going to do today. So as Richard referred to, we've been in the process of developing 6 scenarios that we're really using to just sort of test and evaluate some mix and match components. We don't expect any one of these scenarios to be the answer in and of itself, They are sets of combinations of looking at parking opportunities, transit opportunities, where the city loop might fit into that, bike and ped streets, to form a holistic transportation network, evaluate some combinations thereof, and then the final selected combination of these elements that we come up with at the end of 2017 will probably be some mixing and matching of these elements. So right now, we're putting them in combination. So what we want to do today is we are literally going to walk you through these scenarios. So we'd like the board members to, after I give a little bit of an introduction, we're going to start at that end of the table. We've got some large printouts of the scenarios. Joni's going to walk us through. We're going to use markers. We're going to ask questions. The other boards that you see around the room here are pieces of information from the street use study, from largely from the street use study, but also from some other pieces of information that we can refer to with some of that information. Jonette is our traffic operations expert on the team. And I know at one of the last board meetings, RT, you said you were like, it's Thanksgiving dinner. I want to dig into to the details. So Jeanette's here to kind of answer those detailed questions. Doug is here to talk to us a little bit in more detail about transit, understanding that's maybe something we want to dig into a little bit more, talk about alignments and modes and profiles, whether we're elevated, at grade, or below grade, et cetera. We really anticipate this to be much more of a discussion than a presentation and Q&A. So we do have, they are recording this, so we do have some mics scattered around the table. We can try to pick up some mics and make sure that we get this recorded as much as possible. But as Richard said, we really want this to be more of an informal discussion, kind of kick the tires around a little bit. I will also say that all the information you see before you today is all work in progress. So these are all midpoint deliverables that the various study teams are currently working on. We're working toward deliverables, I think as Richard said, in May. We'll talk about, after we go through the scenarios and have some discussion about them, we'll talk about, Tom will speak to our evaluation process a bit. We'll talk about milestones and the overall process where we think we want to be through the various quarters of 2017. And then we'll just wrap up today's discussion with some thoughts about what we want to present to the board meeting, the formal board meeting on April 27th. So that's kind of the lay of what we had planned for today. If along the way you guys see something you'd like to know more information about, feel free to ask any questions that you might have.
Great. Let me just check in with my board. Is there anything else that you all would like to be able to get out of this roughly 2 hours that we have together?
Can I ask one question? You know, I'm super excited about going through the individual parts of it. I think we would benefit by just having a short, at least, top line thing about what are we trying to accomplish. I don't mean to be like boil the ocean here, but like, for instance, one thing going through my head is that if this was an issue of getting a workforce to a place and then going out, we would do a lot of remote parking. If, however, you lay on top of that the goal of trying to build a vibrant city, there's a huge difference between having a person parked across 52, where they're probably not likely to stay later, versus having them closer. So to me, what we're trying to do is we're really trying to build a destination city. It's not a pure transportation play, it's an urbanization play, where you have to take some balances off of that. But that's just me talking. There may be, and that may not be practical. There are issues of how we actually have the experience from that could be different if there was a super vibrant bike walk corridor that had a park-like feel that created an amenity along the way, et cetera, et cetera. You know, at some point, I think we have to, I want to get to sort of a top line. How are you looking at the sum of the parts as opposed the whole instead of the sum of the parts, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think that's a really great point. I'm just curious, has the city talked about this sort of, or the EDA, have you talked about this sort of big picture question that RT is is posing for
Yeah,
us?
I think that's the biggest question we've been working on all around. I'll let Richard and,
So when we get to the table, one of the first things first options you're gonna see is DMC modified. In other words, it's taking the DMC plan and based on what we know today versus what was known 2 years ago, these are potentially some constraints and opportunities that will come up, we need you to address. So again, we understand the point you're making, and I think what you're gonna hear today is that there are some limitations for us to be able to get people close to the downtown to saturate those peripheral parking lots that were identified in the plan because of the limited portal capacity. Now, we can take the traditional approach that DOTs have taken for years and expand that capacity of the roadway system to be able to get more people to a point. But that's contrary to what the whole DMC and downtown master plan is based on. And so there's, again, this trade-off, and so it's trying to maximize the amount of people that we can get close, that we can park in downtown and the peripheral lots, but also recognizing that's not going to be all employees and that we're going to have to provide alternatives. And
I do like your point though, RT, about, and that's why we brought Tom on this team, to make sure that we keep that thread, that we are creating a destination city. It's not just about getting people, moving staff around or employees. It's about creating this dense urban core. And so Tom was brought on the team to make sure that that thread stays there throughout the entire planning, so it just doesn't turn into a normal city planning process. Rather, it keeps the core of DMC destination. So I don't know if you have any points.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the evaluation framework item. Really, the part of the intent of setting up that evaluation framework is to make sure that we're doing sort of mission-based, guiding principle-based planning around this, because now as we move from the vision plan into this part of the effort where we're digging in on a lot more detail and design, it's certainly easy to slip back into standard transportation planning mode. So the kind of the intent of having an integrated evaluation approach that all the discipline teams are using and ultimately will help us with the decision process is to continue to remind us, what our DMC user groups are. It's not just the commuter. Obviously, we're focused on patient, visitor, local residents as well. But again, also thinking about, what was that vision? As you said, it was a vision of a dense urban city. That really is that's the DMC play, right? So I think you'll see as we go through these, there's definitely trade-offs between some of those guiding principles. Some of those are driven by land availability. Some of those are driven by, what type of transit we're looking at and different alternatives. I think it's a great opportunity for the board to point to how you feel about those trade-offs, because I think the technical team recognizes they're there. As Beth said, none of these are probably the right answer, but they're starting to put some more detail to some options. So I certainly like where you're going with that, and I think when we talk about the evaluation framework, you'll at least get a little better sense for how we're trying to corral that question.
Okay. Yes. Oh, sure.
Just one other quick thing. So one of the other things is what are we thinking about as far as what resources we can use? I think one of the things that I think has come up that's been complicated before is saying there's only X amount that we can use, and so we're limited to a relatively small amount of money to do some big transportational things. But I think through this process over the past couple of years, we've identified a couple options. One being the ability that we found now that we do have the right within the state law to do something you can't do in most places, which is to use tax increment for transportation. So is that a given that we're starting with?
What I would say is, as we've been putting together the scenarios, we have not unduly constrained ourselves from a financial standpoint. And particularly some of the transit modes we'll talk about today, some probably require a little more investment, some a little less. And that is part of sort of that cost, and the ability to finance is certainly part of the evaluation criteria that we'll be applying to these scenarios as we move through the coming months.
One of the issues that we had from what we did originally and then got into this is that that was seen as a plan that was a vision plan disconnected from the financial reality. Then we got into a point where we were rightfully saying what is practical to do. I'd love to see this get to what I think I hear you saying is that we're going to get to all of that, but I don't think it's helpful for us to go through another process of visioning disconnected from the financial reality, but to actually have each of these options costed within that complex.
Right, and
context.
certainly as we've been putting the scenarios together, and Doug can certainly speak to this as we're going around, we're very mindful of, say, an elevated steel rail system is going to be more costly than a rubber-tired at-grade system. So we have orders of magnitude of cost, but until we get down to a little finer grained, it's hard for us to say, this is a $100 million option, this is a $200 million option, this is an $8 million option. We kind of know relative where they sit to each other. But as you'll see today when we walk through the scenarios, sort of the geographic extent, the amount of connectivity, the different areas we're connecting with what various modes will all play into ultimately both not only what the cost is, but also what the financial resources are that we can bring to the table for those modes.
So if I can say one more thing, I promise to shut up from the different rules, is that all right? That as we do that, we shouldn't just assume that because something costs more, it's going to be more or less likely.
Yes.
Meaning that there are options that could attract more investment. If the biggest portal challenge we have is 52 as we hit Civic Center Drive, that an urban village there with parking could actually attract more development if the transportation option was slick enough, read more expensive.
Yes.
So just as long as we get that.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely. So maybe before we stand up and get to the table in line with what RT was saying before, I was just going to mention a few things about things that we've shown to the board in January, which was really about the purpose and need of all these various elements, which is sort of the guiding principles. So from a transit perspective, we've recognized there are 3 primary transit markets we're trying to serve. There is the commuter market, the 9-to-5 employees. There is the patient Mayo market, which includes a lot of back and forth movement between St. Mary's and the downtown area as well. And then there is also just that notion of needing to move through downtown. Whether it's from a workplace to a restaurant or an entertainment venue to somewhere else, et cetera, so that there's that element that facilitates just movement through various destinations in downtown. From a parking perspective, we've been focusing on the policies that we talked about at the last board meeting, really embracing this park once philosophy, where we don't want to have folks needing to park multiple times, but they can park once, either at the edge or within downtown, and then use other transit services to move around. We've also been applying the principles of trying to get modal shifts in place so that we're not completely a city of single occupancy vehicles, that we're providing those opportunities, and yet that we're also being mindful of the need to create an environment where patients and visitors can easily access the services that they need to get to downtown, that there is 24/7 service for people who maybe work not the 9-to-5 shift or want to stay for entertainment purposes or other reasons, that we're also recognizing that we're trying to not just create a city of cars and parking ramps, but also that more livable city complex. In the city loop, we talked a lot at our last meeting about the need to serve not only sort of the athletic, biker, runner, walker, but those who are looking for respite, those who need ADA accommodations, et cetera. And we talked quite a bit also at our last meetings about the need to still make sure that vehicles can travel easily and safely through downtown, that we're looking for streets that are built for all modes, but that we're not creating sacrificing congestion to obtain some other things. So there is, as Tom said, there's a lot of trade-offs and there's a lot of balances. And these scenarios are set up to exactly do that, to sort of look at well, what if we did this? Well, what if we organized things a different way? Well, what if we oriented things this direction instead of that direction? And looking at those holistic principles and trade-offs. So that's where we've started from. So with that, what I'm going to ask us to do is actually stand up, and board members, I would suggest that you...
Like, okay, we're ready.
Board members, we're going to suggest that maybe you stand at this end of the table. We're going to start down here and work our way this way. And other members of the team are going to gather around. So as Richard promised, actually I'm going to move this over. So are we on? Okay. As Richard promised, we're going to start with looking at some opportunities and constraints. So this map right here, and this is just a very high-level map, but you can see the DMC boundary here in gray, extending with St. Mary's Place, heart of the city, Discovery Square, the future location of University of Minnesota Rochester, and the Civic Center where we sit today. So those are some of the key destinations that we were looking at connecting and serving when we're looking at our various transportation modes. We've also identified some parking opportunities, and these are not the sort of parking opportunities that will come with development of any one single parcel or block within the city, but more those opportunities to look for larger aggregations of parking that maybe can serve as a multimodal opportunity. Folks who are coming from other communities to transfer to a downtown circulator option. This will also be well connected with bikes and pedestrians. Could be an urban village where there's other land uses integrated, but not to the degree that we're detracting or diluting what's happening downtown.
Are those additional public parking facilities that you're talking above what's available now?
Yes, yes. So some of the areas you'll see that we've been looking at is the 1452 interchange, very broadly speaking. There's some underutilized land there. There's a bubble just north of Miracle Mile where we're kind of thinking very broad-mindedly here about could there be something that in part straddles that highway right-of-way. You've been up in Minneapolis, the 394 ABC ramps, they utilize the multiple levels and build out over some of that right-of-way. It may be a way to capture particularly commuters without bringing them into the downtown streets, give them an easy place to park, connect them with transit. The Civic Center Drive area, as we move to the east, is just another area that we're looking for parking. And then as we move around along towards Broadway, the Fullerton lot area, there certainly is opportunity to expand some of those surface parking lot areas northward. Also, maybe in the Kmart site, there's a lot of underutilized land there, and the fairgrounds, yes.
Okay.
Yep. And then to the south here at the fairgrounds. So also, kind of looking, where are people coming into the city? They're coming in from the south, they're coming in from the north and the west primarily. So those are some of the opportunities that we're looking at to try to make some connections between.
Just before you move off of that,
Yes.
and maybe you'll do this as we go through, us constantly keeping an overlay, where do we want to grow? So for instance, when I look at this.
Going in.
That one?
Yeah, which is.
That's around the Kmart site area?
Yeah, which is real nice, but then I think about here and the growth potential in all of that. It's a little,
Right.
like, it would be probably more advantageous for us to grow here than here. I'm just using an example, but I think if we can be at the same time saying, where do we want to grow? Like, we don't necessarily want to grow here, we'd rather grow here or something like that. And that's, at some point, the circles are going to intersect, and some point they aren't. And that's when we make the trade-off. So just as we go through this, it would be really nice if we could be having an overlay on where the disconnect is between where we want to grow and where this is going to happen,
Correct.
or where the transportation needs are.
Yeah, so that's, those kinds of thoughts would be great to bring forward today. We've purposely kept these bubbles very loose. We're not focusing yet at this point. As we get towards May, end of May, we'll have more parcel level evaluation, what's really viable. But right now, we're handling things very loosely. So the other thing that we've been looking at is also some of our constraints. So in the constraint map here, we've circled in sort of those teal bubbles residential neighborhoods. We still want to protect those neighborhoods, keep them very viable, keep them very vibrant, not interfere with those close-in neighborhoods to downtown. So we've been mindful of those. We do have an area just south of 2nd Street that's circled there in orange that is, there's a lot of topography in that area, which can make it difficult for transit in particular, or the city loop if we want to keep things ADA accessible. So we're being mindful of that. We also highlighted in yellow here, we have some streets that have a lot of range of demand on them. They are narrow streets. There's a lot of vehicles who want to use those streets, but we also have demand for pedestrians, bicyclists, bus, transit, et cetera. So we're also being sort of mindful of those street limitations and knowing that we just need to be aware of how much can we pack into that 5-pound bag in those areas. And as Richard referred to earlier, we've identified some key portals into the city that are currently starting to experience some congestion, and as traffic levels grow over time, we anticipate there's sort of bottlenecks getting into the city, so they're going to become increasingly congested. And we just need to be aware of how much more traffic we're trying to draw in through there. Can we redirect traffic? Can we capture it before it gets there? Can we get people into mode shift? Again, just kind of recognizing that from a traffic congestion perspective, that's one of the challenges we're trying to address.
Are we reading this right, that this is tough, this is critically tough?
Yeah.
Yes. So,
And maybe I'm going to turn it over. Where's Pat and Jonette? Where'd you guys disappear to?
over here.
Oh, there we go.
We're over here. So the first thing, and then this was the worst realization when we looked at this capacity thing, was about this. But just like in angioplasty, if you can get over that, that's not great, but it's not critical. So one of the things that's really curious is about how to capture some of that, how to get it into here without coming through there. Are we going to talk about some of those options?
Yes, we're going to talk about some of those strategies today. Does anyone have any questions about that portal capacity or what we're noticing there or what we're anticipating in terms of growth?
I'd like to point out just that whole interchange for a major city, that's the most embarrassing interchange I've ever been involved in. A left-hand turn to go onto 52 both ways up 14. Yeah. It is so dangerous. I think whatever we try to do, we have to do some correction to that entree into the whole area before we can get to the blockage there. We got to do a lot of work there with MnDOT's help.
So let's go to that for a second then. Is that when the capacity got to be so constrained, is there a way that, I don't think we want to solve everything with engineering. I think you raised that point earlier, where it shouldn't just be about engineering, but is that partly because of that, or do we just have a volume number that even an upgraded interchange is going to have the same constraint?
I mean, like Doug says, you have
There's one, you can use that one.
you've got people trying to go this way, turning left here, and people trying to go north on 52 here. It should be a full clover leaf, in my opinion. Then you wouldn't have, because these people trying to make lefts going north and lefts going south here, back everybody up, and everybody's trying to dive in and out. So if it was a full clover leaf, it would flow better. That said, there's still plenty of capacity. The capacity is limited here. People coming in from the west on 14, I mean, it's crazy in the morning. It's
huge. We need infrastructure like Duluth in that area right there. When you
Right.
come into Duluth, that's what you need.
That's correct.
Does anybody know whether this, is this currently on MnDOT's 20-year plan,
No,
or is this a whole new thing?
No, that's fairly new.
Transportation bill,
Well,
then.
that's there was a full, as I recall, there was a full cloverleaf design in there when we redid 52, the $252 million thing from 75th Street all the way down to 63. And then there was budgets, considerations, and that was one of the things that got cut out of there, because it would have invited, the acquisition of land needs to happen here and here, and that was fairly expensive land, as I recall at that time.
So I would encourage, maybe let's just let Pat and Jonette give us some thoughts about what's
No worries, no worries. I think there is some issues to get the interchange, but the real portal capacity is right here at 16th. And what we find from about 7 to 7:45, that's pretty much full today.
Yep.
We probably can't get that many more cars to that spot.
And is it 2 lanes both ways?
Correct.
Trying to remember, yeah.
Yeah, correct.
What do we know about these drivers? Because it strikes me that one of the things we want to figure out is, we're thinking about this all about getting down to the center of town. But I would imagine some of those people coming in 14 are going around, are they? Are they,
There are some.
Is there any kind of measurable?
Drive is a bypass to downtown to go east out to the college and the Federal Medical.
If you're trying to get over to RCTC, for example,
Yeah.
you come down that way.
And I have no empirical evidence. I would say it's 6:30 till 7:30 in the morning. The bulk of the people that are coming in here are coming downtown to either work or go to the clinic. Some of them are turning north. If they're going over here to the college, most of them will avoid that like the plague. They may hop on 52 and come around 52 and then go down Highway 14 to get there. Some people will go through there, but some people think it's miserable.
Percentage-wise, you're probably correct, but there is a lot of people who use Civic Center Drive as a bypass to downtown.
Well, it is. I mean, this point you're making is a real good one, because on some level that, traffic's like water. It'll go where there's an opening. And if we create this really slick thing, we may not be dealing with a zero-sum game. We may be attracting more people to go through there, and just keep having to build and build and all of that. But
Just as a capacity, and Richard probably knows this too, if you go out, I mean, we have, from a county level, if you go, what is it, where 104 is, 3 miles west, you cannot get on high. It's an at-grade intersection. You cannot, you are taking your life in your hands in the morning out there. And it's 14s, it's 2 lanes both ways.
You're talking about.
Yeah, it's further west.
This way.
It's,
Right.
it's,
That's part of that.
you can't do it. So that 14, I think, is close to capacity at that point in time.
And you talk about where people are coming from. Again, all of the analysis shows that it's north and west, not all, but a biggest percentage. We also have information that suggests that about 61% of the people coming into downtown live within 10 miles. Okay? So that also suggests there's 39% of the people live beyond 10 miles.
Right.
And so we have these commuter
Right.
sheds, if you will, and are there different options that we can provide to those? For example, we have people commuting all the way from Owatonna, and we have
Right.
regional bus service that brings those people in. But do the cities like Byron and Dodge Center, do we need to look at remote parking facilities more so in those, not just to serve the regional, but are there other opportunities of
I think,
the way of the regional buses?
I think this is such an important issue, and especially as we think about what's going to be potentially a profound worker shortage in Rochester. And because I spend so much time talking to all the communities that are around Rochester, and they're all like looking and waiting with bated breath to see what, kind of how they can connect into this, both in terms of people and also in terms of, just like physical connections. And so I think thinking broadly about those regional bus services, I know Mayo does a fair amount of that already, a significant amount of that. If you're able to come into town go completely with transit instead of
trying to figure out how to maneuver something like this, you'd be potentially better off as long as the transit was flexible enough.
It's hard not to jump ahead,
Yeah.
but I will ask you to remember this as you go down the table.
Yeah.
Because what you're going to see is a repeating theme here of development opportunities along Civic Center Drive and 7th Street Northwest with this scenario here. And the same with 3rd Avenue and Broadway. So the opportunity to basically do something on an economic development perspective from housing, mixed use. These corridors seem to set themselves up very nicely for a mixed use that includes some parking. The other point that I want to make is, as you're going through there, remember this circle here, and this is located generally between 4th Avenue, which is a major portal into downtown, and 8th Avenue.
Is that the VFW then?
The VFW is right here. That little triangle right there. Maybe that little triangle right there.
New building. That's
That's the original planner.
Yeah.
Richard, American Legion, right?
Yes, yep. So, the thing I want you to remember about this, just a little tidbit to give you. We could park 5,000 vehicles conceivably in this location. We can't get 5,000 cars to that location because of this
Yeah.
constraint. But we could park 100 commuter buses at 50 passengers each and have 5,000 people there that we could serve with a circulator.
And would those
So it's
buses run until 8 o'clock at night so somebody can have a dinner?
That's one of the challenges of what you would like to see happen is that a lot of the commuter routes basically have 2 or some have 3 buses in the morning and buses in the afternoon that will take you to a destination.
But isn't that was the original
I'm not
intent of
suggesting
the
that,
plan.
guys.
Yes.
So
transit
the
tier
transit
is-
plan
That
was
was over
here,
here.
and that was for buses. That's exactly what we
Yep.
were planning to
Yep.
do. But this space right now doesn't seem to be working because somebody's already building in the land.
Well, again, exactly. So, again, it's part of.
But I'm just
you know,
saying that this concept of putting buses there is what you all approved in the DMC plan.
So
Now we're trying to find the location.
So
for
much
that.
of this goes back to how do we solve this? And, I think deconstructing a lot of things, there are a lot of places, there's, one of the best bakeries in Minnesota is there, all these sorts of people turning right and left and all of that, but that slows a lot down. But you sure as heck wouldn't want to hurt the bakery, right? Or the dropping off your car, you can stop and get coffee there, So, but that part of that jam up is that too.
Well, to your earlier point, though, we gotta be cautious of the idea of widening the funnel for
Yeah.
that one red segment, because as we do that,
It'll
you
move it
just,
right.
you just
Then
move
it'll it'll make it easier for,
Yeah.
right.
closer to
Right.
downtown, which is
Right.
absolutely not what we want. So
Right.
there's probably some operational solutions that can allow a little bit more through that portal, but, widening there versus thinking about, can we bring more transit in there? Can we bring more regional buses in there is a different solution set.
Can I ask one other question about capacity here? Because, a lot of those people, I would imagine, are people working at Mayo who have parking. And that is one group, and one of the advantages here is unlike like a downtown or something, you've got one employer doing a lot. So there can be incentives. If we have more parking over here, that some of the incentive could be the Mayo people who get parking can have a cheaper or better option.
Over here.
Yeah, over here. So, this isn't a problem. I mean, it's not great, and this isn't so great either. How the heck you get over here is a problem. But there are some ways that we can.
Right.
And
we
some
can
people are
intervene in
coming
the
from
market.
this way, too.
Yeah.
So
But
there
you're
was
right on the
a-
mark there. There are ways to create incentives to get people to
Yeah.
drive another 5 minutes to be able to park somewhere.
I
To
just don't
save
understand
20 minutes.
how to get, it would be great if second worked, but second doesn't work either, so you'd have to go way around.
Right.
The second is going to be a primary transit corridor.
But this is just for, in terms of scale, that looks like it's what, half a mile?
Oh, it's probably 3
I mean, this is
miles all the way
2,000
around.
feet,
This is a little less than half a mile.
so, yeah.
About 2 miles.
It's not,
I think
yeah.
you're on the right track. I mean, but I would
It's
posit
like
that you should have a
2/3 the way around
parking.
Lake Erie.
Yeah.
These people are
That's a
coming
difference.
from the north and the west, I would think, and just for a place out on West Circle Drive and Highway 14, someplace out there have a great big park and ride where people park their cars, because they're all coming from the north and west. I mean, the bulk of them. They park out there, and then they hop on a commuter bus or a light rail, whatever, and they get downtown.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't make them, most of those people are coming from northwest. There's no reason for them to drag them over to southeast. There's plenty of space someplace out there. to put
But
a
the
park
reason
and
is
ride.
5 o'clock.
Right,
5
but-
o'clock, the whole town loses just this boatload of energy as everybody hops on these
Well,
commuter buses.
and I agree with you there. I think you gotta build into your plan extending those commuter buses so they run somehow till 10 o'clock at night
With the
or
shuttles to the
sometime,
park and ride,
so they can
RT.
stay
Yeah.
down and have a dinner
But,
or a
but,
bus.
I've been thinking about this a lot, and I keep thinking, okay, how do we do this? You don't want to run, you can't practically afford to run these huge buses out there. What if we had personal rapid transit? We do. The strange thing is it's called the car. And so the weird thing that evolutionally I've gotten into is this idea is that if this was just a transportation thing, I'd be saying, try to get everybody to mode shift. But oddly enough, we want them, because the workforce is so diffused over so far, you almost want them to have that personal transit. I know it's totally counterintuitive to like mass transit, but for a city growing, you want them to have their car nearby because you're never going to be able to replicate that experience unless Mayo discovers the cure for cancer or something. It's just going to be so damn expensive. So that's a weird thing I found myself arguing is, geez, maybe we need people to be closer to their cars so that they stay longer to make the city energetic.
I was just going to say, we do have some experience with this, and Richard, you can talk to it, because we've got the remote park and ride lots at IBM and down at the Grand Park right now that we've had pretty good success with, so I think you can build on some of that experience.
Yeah, and we provide extended hour service to those. I think the point RT is making is if you live in Byron, that doesn't help you any.
Right.
Or you live in Dodge Center or Ortona, you need to get on that bus with the last one leaves at 5:30,
Right.
or you don't get home.
But if we took a lot of that money and put it into getting them from the park and ride, if the experience was getting them to here as opposed to getting them to Byron, you can afford to do a lot more of that.
Right.
Yep.
And
I
so
think-
that's probably the point you were making.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, West Circle
Yeah.
Drive was just a point. That's close enough where I think it would work. I don't have a particular property
Yeah.
in mind, but Byron's too far.
So I believe you're going to see that as we go down the table.
Let's down this way.
But
Yes, down this
one
way.
other point I want to make, one other point that is really important. So the DMC plan is a 20-year plan, okay? We are thinking beyond that, because we can't afford as a community to build something that's only good for 20 years. We're thinking way beyond that, and some of these visions that you may see here may not be realized to any great extent in the 20 years. But it's part of, again, a philosophy and an approach to managing transportation, building a vibrant community. And so that's something that we have in our head that we're thinking about as we're going through all of this. Okay?
Can I say one other thing to what RT had to say there? I think you're onto something in terms of the need to keep people. I mean, that's sort of a core element of the plan. At the same time, the piece you're struggling with is difficult. We can't have 10-minute service till midnight
Right.
to places like Byron. I think we do also need to keep in mind that some of that can be addressed at the policy level, and it's really about creating flexibility. So, part of the DMC plan was about creating choices. We've got commuter bus service that provides limited choice. We've got park and rides at the edge of town, provides a little bit more choice. We've got peripheral parking that's connected to a high-quality, high-frequency circulator, which provides really good choice. And then there's people who are driving all the way in, which optimizes that experience and ability to stay. But part of it's around policy, too. It's about how we treat parking. So we see a lot of hospitals, a lot of institutions are going to a daily parking model where people are choosing what they do on a daily basis. I mean, people are consuming transportation much more flexibly these days.
That's a really
I think we need to think about how we build flexibility into the
That's
system.
what you're saying.
Yeah.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
So
So you're not like
people are-
constrained to a monthly parking contract,
Right.
for example.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, that's
Okay.
really interesting.
All right, so I'm going to move us down now to the third piece here, which is, we've called it the no-build scenario. And really, what this is understanding what's the null alternative underlying before we even build anything DMC related on top. And the reason why it's important to look at that is the city as a whole is undertaking an update of their comprehensive plan. I think that's maybe hitting the streets, Charlie, today, this week. This week, next week. So the city staff have been looking at some of these issues on a regional basis. And the city also just updated their TDP, their transit development plan. So Joni's going to talk us through this, but Charlie's really our expert here, so I'm also going to give him a mic because the city on a whole has been thinking about their park and rides and their transit pieces as well. So.
Okay, well, just to sort of describe what's on this map, you know, we touched a little bit on park and rides and what we have existing already, like at IBM and fairgrounds and stuff. These dotted circles that you see are areas that have been identified in the work through the Transit Development Plan and the Comp Plan as target areas to look at long-term that we think are good areas to look at for potential future park and ride sites. One of the things that in particular helped us identify those sites, particularly in some of these cases, is that as part of the comp plan, we've looked at the idea of, you know, what we're working on here is focused on downtown, but really that's kind of like one end of the trip, and it's where's the other end of the trip in terms of within the city. And if we can create a system that can get more of the other end of the trip oriented so that it's accessible and can easily access transit, that might be part of the solution here. So as part of the comp plan, we've come up with a concept that we're calling a primary transit network, and that's what this north-south green line basically on Broadway and this east-west line on 2nd Street and 4th Street southeast are intended to signify, is the concept of developing a system that eventually would evolve into probably a bus rapid transit system. And then along with that in the comp plan, sort of fine-tuning our land use along those corridors to encourage more mixed use, a little higher density residential use, so that you have more people living in those corridor areas that can access that transit and use that to get in and out of downtown. So as part of the comp plan, the overall city plan, that's sort of the vision that we're working towards in the future to help support, you know, a more dense, more active downtown area.
Just out of curiosity, why is this called the no-build scenario?
Because the BRT, this primary transit network, we envision that happening even, you know, that's the base case in all the scenarios.
So you're saying if there was no destination medical center, you'd
There-
have to be doing stuff anyways?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
I see.
So it may,
This
you
is
know,
what you'd be doing regardless of whether the in this community, regardless of the DMC.
right.
But
It just,
also anticipating those levels of employment.
Yeah.
correct.
Right.
And what I was going to say is that we would have a primary transit network. It may look a little different in terms of frequencies. You know, with more dense development downtown, you know, the idea is that we potentially can get to a point where we have like 10 or 15-minute service on those corridors in the downtown. If you didn't have the level of development downtown, that might be 20 or 30-minute service instead of 10 or 15. So it gives you the flexibility to respond, you know, depending on what we actually see happen downtown.
Does creating that more frequent transit service on Broadway impact this? You know, it's not a yellow street here, is it? No, it's not.
No.
You know, would you be, I mean, one of the problems is you've got a near freeway running through the middle of where we want people to walk. But you need a lot of it. I mean, it's a really tough street to cross.
Right.
It's not, you know, and the transit service would do a lot to connect all that, but would it slow the traffic enough to?
Well, actually, the intent is to try and, you know, we've gone through a process already about 2 years ago where we came up with sort of a master plan for Broadway that actually tries and incorporates ideas to kind of transform that street into less, to calm it, you know, less of an arterial and more of kind of like a main street, particularly in the downtown.
So what I'm asking, and I think that's a great thing, what I'm asking is, does that create a trade-off for the capacity that we need there?
Well, we would still have the 4-lane, you know, through, you know, 4 lanes of traffic for vehicles. I think what it probably does more so is maybe affects the travel time a little bit, you know, where it calms the traffic from that perspective. So, And part of that concept on Broadway then is to incorporate, to set that corridor up, even if we do work in the short term, so that in the long term, it can accommodate a BRT type of service. So you start introducing features and identifying places where you're going to have your stations and all those kinds of amenities.
Okay.
All right, so
All right.
I'm going to keep us moving just so we can
All right.
get through all this in 2
Absolutely.
hours.
So once again, with the idea of the no build, it's that baseline condition, and it helps tell the story about what additional benefit will these other approaches provide beyond what's already being planned to begin with.
Okay, great.
So one of the things I just want to quickly highlight here on this map, and we're calling these our pedestrian streets, and these are the streets that were highlighted right in the DMC plan as being streets that we really want to primarily focus on the pedestrians and make sure it's a really high-quality experience for them. And so you're going to see throughout all these concepts, these streets, particularly Second and Second again, and First, and our connection down to the destination center, that's going to be consistent through all of these concepts that you're going to see. But we wanted to make sure that we're overlaying that pedestrian network on top of all of our other systems to make sure where how everything is fitting together.
Before you move off that, we'll use that to essentially that. The thing I'm trying to figure out is that some kind of interesting things start to happen here because, am I lined up right here? So for instance, that lines up to that.
Correct.
So,
So is that kind of what's on this map?
Yes.
Yep, you will
okay,
start
well,
to see
then
that.
They were thinking about that.
No, you're just one step ahead of us here.
You're following the logic. That's good. That's good.
So,
You're amazing.
thank you. Okay, so one of the concepts that we're bringing forward right now that we have as one of our alternatives here is called the DMC modified. So really was trying to, based on what are some of the existing conditions out today, that no longer are going to really allow the DMC vision to fully take form. Like, there's development happening up where the transit plaza was supposed to be. So we're trying to figure out, we tried to tweak it as minimally as possible to still try to keep as much of the intent of the original vision for this concept. And so you'll see for our definitions here, these are the very same parking facilities that were in the other concepts, but we've defined them a little bit more in terms of what we're calling periphery, which means we really feel that these are lots that are close enough downtown that someone could park here and just walk right into downtown, versus what we're calling remote, which probably some people still could walk and someone could still walk from here to St. Mary's, but in general, to get from that lot into the heart of downtown, it's more than likely someone's going to want to get onto another mode of transportation, a bicycle or a circulator of some sort. So this concept is once again showing this is using an idea of what we're calling, each one of these concepts is going to have a transit mode associated with it.
But they're all mix and match.
But they're all sort of mix and match. So this one right here that we're showing and we're kind of studying is the idea of a streetcar. So an at-grade streetcar. So once again, you'd have service from your remote lot coming down Second, circulating down to the government center. There would have to be a new bridge here at 6 to get across the river. But then once again, making that touch down to the University of Minnesota, and then doing the one-way loop here of the 3rd and 4th, that would then provide access not only in Second, but north-south to the Discovery Square and to the heart of the city. So it's envisioned that this would be a system that would grow over time, but basically touching onto the parking here, touching parking here, and through this loop, touching onto parking here.
From a cost benefit, including the cost of that bridge, what would be the best first link of that?
That's part of our work in progress. We're still looking at that question right now.
You red flag. I have a red flag moment right now.
Okay.
Second Street is, you cannot expand Second Street. That property, you can't buy property to the north or to the south. I mean, you can do anything, but it's probably
There's property available
unfeasible.
to the north. There's property available to the north.
The whole way.
Well, like a block.
Well, you guys own a majority of it.
Here and there. Well, my problem is, back to the funnel that Tom was talking about, you know, we've got, this is a pedestrian protected lane. We got cars that we still are gonna have down here, the same number of cars, we're assuming it's not gonna go up, which may or may not be a valid assumption. We want walkers going down here, we wanna have a good experience of people walking, and we wanna have the BRT going down here. You can't, there's no place to put all that stuff. I
So
don't think that's a
that's-
red flag to Jimbo.
And that's a good red flag. It's a red flag we all share. This is about the
I would think
10
we
pounds of
should
stuff in a
be
5-pound
trying
sack.
to shove something on one of these other streets. I mean, put the BRT over here on First. I don't know, I mean, I'm not, maybe that'll be.
You're
set up
anticipating
for a
where we're
place.
going next.
But
We're gonna go
it's
start
too
looking
many
at some of these
colors here.
things.
No, I agree. I mean, that's from the beginning, I thought Second was the logical place, and now it's just too small.
So, just to go back to where our constraints are, we do have constraints on both the north side and the south side of Second. We've got residential neighborhoods that are very close in on either side. As you see, as we go through the scenarios, we're starting to look at some other ideas, but Second Street is one of our primary areas of concern. Part of the deliverables that we'll start to see in May is starting to look at exactly some of those concerns you're raising. What happens, and actually, I think Pat maybe even has done a little bit of a study of what happens with constraints on Second Street and lane capacities. Am I right? Am I wrong?
Yeah, there's a graphic over there where we just started. I mean, we just
So-
printed that yesterday. So.
Right. So we're just starting, this is where we're a work in progress. We're starting to look at what are the transportation impacts, what does that do from a visual quality to city loop, which we also, Joni didn't get there yet. So, there's a lot of things on Second, and part of what we're evaluating is, can that work?
Well,
Or how can that
I
work?
don't think it can, I mean, maybe it can, but the premise to me would be, we gotta shove something over to First. And I mean, maybe it doesn't gotta go First, maybe it's gotta go down to Center, but you gotta put the BRT down there, or the bikes, or the pedestrians, or something. You can't keep cramming stuff in a finite area.
Okay, so that's
Okay.
why this alternative is so important.
Okay.
To prove Jimbo wrong, or right. Okay?
It's not hard to do.
No, I'm just saying.
Because,
Right.
could I
right
just
or
say,
prove 'em
this
wrong.
is what the current development plan
Right.
that we approved
And
says
we-
we're gonna do.
We
So
feel we
maybe
need
we
to
have move off
evaluate
of
that.
would
We
be the-
need to
right.
evaluate that against
Yeah.
any other alternative.
Yeah.
Is this still a valid
I'm with you.
plan? Is it valid, and if it's not, where are the constraints?
Mm-hmm.
So, Second
Jim, I've
Street
gone through the
capacity might
six
be a
steps,
constraint.
the denial.
I need therapy.
So,
I know
yeah,
I
yeah.
need
So,
therapy.
no, I've gone through the thing, I do think the one thing we ought to introduce into this is time. That all parts of the day are not the same. And so we can't just be looking at a number. And, we have to figure out what is the pinch point? And do we have a rush hour issue? Do we have another? It's also an emergency thing, I think.
I think one other thing to keep in mind with this alternative is that this area, in the DMC plan, the idea was 16,000, basically not all the parking, but 16,000 parking spaces.
Right.
Right in here.
Yeah.
Whereas these other plans, when you see these circles, that's where some of that 16,000 is being shifted to.
So I would respectfully request that these comments come off of this and come onto these, because we're repeating it. Because I think we need to keep the DMC modified as true to the original plan as possible. And the only reason there are any changes
I understand what you're saying.
is because
Maybe-
this isn't as viable a location for the bus storage and vehicle parking. So we've only tweaked it where we needed to address a constraint.
So you have a series of scenarios,
Yes.
and what you're saying, I think, is that maybe at the end of the day, we reject this scenario, but rather than trying to change this scenario, we should look at all of them.
Correct. Yep.
And then figure out whether we want to
Right.
reject this down the road.
Just one comment on this, I think, I think, Jim, you point to one of the key trade-offs in this plan, and a key challenge for Rochester is you've got a street that connects two major nodes. You're asking it to do a lot of things. You've got neighborhood and topographic constraints that don't provide a lot of redundancy to that, so, you've got a corridor that needs to do a lot.
Right.
The philosophy of the DMC plan, you can call it right or wrong, was that the only way we can ask that street to be a great street and do everything that we want it to do is to sacrifice automobile mobility and say we're going to rely on other modes to provide that vein of circulation. So that's sort of the philosophy of the DMC. We also said in the DMC plan that we wanted to make this a city street, that we wanted to democratize transportation, and we thought street running rail in its own right of way provided that transportation for the community that both served the Mayo needs, but also was transportation for the residents, was also, you know, a mode that people felt like they had good access to at the street. Now, that's not, you know, to say that's right or wrong or better than any of these other alternatives, but I think I just want to remind us that's sort of how we came to that decision.
Yeah.
And there's definitely trade-offs associated with that.
Just as we go through this, could I just introduce one other element of complexity here for a second? Rightfully, when you're doing the streetcar loop, you don't want to do a bunch of turns and all of this. But just when we get into the city loop, one of the, you know, the model, the best piece of urban infrastructure is the cultural corridor in Indianapolis. I just love that thing because for the first time it said, we don't have to think like this, okay? If we're doing that, especially with bikes and peds, it can go wherever the hell we want it to go. This is really exciting. So this is a very logical thing, but I just think when we get into that where pedestrians go and all that, if you do the markings right, it can go wherever. So it doesn't have to be so logical. And so I do think we can introduce into all of that less logic. The purple is a ped bike way, right? City loop, that's right.
It's a branded.
ADA compliant.
That's okay, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
so that's
But
why
it
it can't go
doesn't
anywhere.
have to go down here. To Jim's point about first, it could certainly go down first, but it can go down first to second to this and that. It's okay.
I think so. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're trying to get people access to where they want to go in
Yeah.
a most direct and convenient way that we can. And so, and we want to make sure that, absolutely, that this thing is a high, you know, it's branded, you understand you're on the city loop, it's a very comfortable place to bike and walk, and you know, and you also have very clear wayfinding to help you figure out how to navigate the loop. So to a certain extent, we want it very logical and understandable for people. You know, if we're thinking about patients or their people who are accompanying them that want to just get out and go for a walk, you know, it has to be very logical and very, you know, for them just to get out on first time and know where they're going.
Well, here's one of the reasons I think I want to just introduce this before we walk into this. A light bulb went off for me when you started talking about this being so close to St. Mary's. If we've been thinking about everybody going down to the Peace Plaza, but if you really look at our pinch points here, I mean, if that could capture a lot of people going to St. Mary's, wouldn't that impact the pinch point?
Well, they still have to get in there somehow.
Yeah, but if there was an exit right off the freeway, they could get right into there, and then that diminishes our pinch point.
Right, so that's
And
what.
so then, if you take a city loop and you have a couple of block way to get there, that's super high amenity. I take this beautiful 2-block, 3-block walk every morning. I do it in every, well, it's what, 1, 2,
Yeah,
it's 3
yes,
blocks.
it's only like, yeah, 5
It's a
blocks.
So if everybody who went to St. Mary's stopped here, that's why I think a little more knowledge of who those people are would be helpful.
All
Okay,
right.
sorry to go.
No, that's fine. So I do want to just quickly talk about the city loop for just a few minutes. There's a few quick changes that were made from the original DMC plan. The original plan had the city loop coming down here on Third, and we just bumped it down a block because there are signalized intersections here, and it would be very difficult to try to get across that one-way pair on a bicycle. Also, given the grades in this area and the decision that this really wants to be an ADA accessible facility, so originally it cut down somewhere here like on 7th. So the idea is to bring it back down onto 4th, because that's really probably the most logical place we can really start getting them to the south of 2nd and still maintaining because of the slopes. Yep, absolutely.
The city loop, can't city loop also connect more of a greenway? I mean, couldn't there be like two paths you can take on city loop, a blue one and a green one? One is a very Mayo-centric, and one is if I just want to be part of all these green amenities, because you're only a couple of blocks from just a boatload of wonderful
absolutely.
stuff. And you know, this link connecting up to that too. The green.
Right, there's
circling.
a whole trail network. There's a strong network here that, once again, just from a commuter standpoint, you try to get them in here, and then once they hit the city loop, then they have a way to circulate downtown. And that's why it's called a loop, but we still felt it was really important to still have some sort of a north-south bisector here to help people get into the heart of downtown.
There are trails here.
Correct.
And the city loop would connect to those trails.
Right now, we're trying to work through that right now, because there's actually a one-block gap right
Whatever
now.
scenario we're working on here.
That we're trying to figure out.
So that to me introduces a whole new thing to this blue-green city loop, that it's intentionally advertised as two different experiences. The Freedom Trail in Boston is a historic thing. Okay, if you think that is medical, and then you take the chain of lakes in Minneapolis, basically you're putting the two things together. The part of the problem is that you're in one of the greenest cities anywhere, and there's no green in the center.
In the center.
So if you're like super, the best, smartest thing any person ever told me about a city is Mayor Daley, when I first started, said, trees are cheap. And then he walked away. I thought, what the hell does that mean? Okay, what it really means is for all of these costs, if we just went like nuts, greening up a couple blocks in there, for very little money.
Right, and I think that's part of the idea with this thing. It's a bikeway, it's a walkway, it's green infrastructure. It is really a very pleasant place that you want to be. So I think the idea of the city loop and introducing green, we're connecting to nice green places, but we're also introducing green as part of the city loop itself.
But we got to get back, we're talking transit here, aren't we? We're talking about transit to get to work or to get where you're going. I mean, these are amenities, these are things, I don't think that's in this purview. I agree with you,
Well, Jim, I'm using it as transit. That's the whole point, is that if this is, I'm not going to another place. If this was a super green experience, all of a sudden I want to walk there. That's a transit solution. If down here I want to walk another block because it's nice, that's a transit solution.
I would respectfully disagree with you. I would disagree with you. That's a recreational transit thing. I mean, instead of hopping in my car, what I think this is mostly about, what I'm more is, people want to get from point A to point B.
Well, look at the Midtown Greenway in Minneapolis, where a railroad corridor was turned into a park amenity and became one of the most important transit infrastructures you've got. All we're talking here is doing a 3 to 4 block greening to connect somebody up to other things so that they want to park their car further away.
So there's, because part of the transit thing, we had different people that, I'm not thinking of the right terminology, there's different markets that we're trying to serve at the transit. And one of those markets is trying to do circulation within downtown. Someone could very easily just get on a bike, and if they're so inclined, and do that internal circulation via bike versus using transit. Or someone, instead of having to drive in and park, they can get on their bike, and they can literally bike downtown, and that takes another car off the street.
I'll agree with you that if they have a way that they can get downtown on a bike, that's one thing. But I don't think they're gonna make a decision to use a bike, other than recreationally wise, to go, I'm gonna bike to work because it's greener. I mean, because if they want to be able to get from their house, wherever, to their job, they're not gonna make that decision whether they use a bike. They're gonna make that decision if the trails are easy to use and they're connected, not whether it's green or not, I think.
But why it's important, and you pointed it out earlier, if we're trying to put every mode in one corridor, that may not work.
Right.
And so that's why, regardless of your perspective on the city loop and whether it's transit oriented or not, it still needs a home. It still needs to be physically located.
Yeah.
So we have to integrate it into the discussion and into the planning. Where does it want to be?
Oh, I don't disagree with that. What I'm saying is, we're talking more about trees and green spaces and things. I don't think people make a decision whether to ride a bike to get to work or to get to their appointment, and whether it's pleasant. If it's real iffy, they may, but it's more about, is it connected? Can I get on my bike and get down there in a safe way? Whether there's an extra tree there or not, I don't think makes a lot of difference to them.
Well, I think for the bike commuter,
This is a really good back and forth. I'm really open to what you're saying, but I just ask you to my experience has been so different just because I've run a city where that's proven over and over and over to be the case. So let's just, the main thing we're trying to do is to get people to do things that are illogical. The most logical thing to do is to pull up to the front door. So the reason we introduce these other things is because we don't want them to do it. There's a certain percentage of the population, not the whole one. But a certain, what we're trying to, we're just peeling the onion back. So one of the ways to do it is take a piece of that population that'll be bought off by the fact that, yeah, I'll park 3 blocks further away because it's so damn nice. And because I just, you know, I hate being inside all day and I get 3 blocks outside. Not everybody's going to do it, but some do. And so just stay open on it, and I don't think it's the most important thing. Everybody's not going to come here from Mazeppa on a scooter, okay? But I do think there's a way to.
I wanted to add one thing also, is the loop that we borrowed, the idea of the loop was from Indy RT, if you remember.
It's the best piece.
And it's an economic driver for that city, amazing economic driver for that city. So it's more than just about going for a nice walk. It really drives the economy in that community.
And I hate to give credit to any city in Hollis besides Minneapolis. But they did a better job.
They did do a good job. All right, we need to keep moving. All right, so this now is.
So this is DMC
That's DMC
modified, and now this is like kind of our first new option?
Yes, so this is A.
They're not that
So
different, but
this
there's-
is a large basin of remote parking here. That the transit mode here would be it'd be at grade as either something like a BRT or a tram. That's the mode we're thinking about, picking up, parking up in this remote lot, actually coming down 16th, possibly taking advantage of some of that area near the Miracle Mile. Once again, following along 2nd Street all the way down to the Civic Center area, and then going down 3rd past, City Hall, and then once again, trying to connect up with some additional peripheral parking, once again at the Fullerton lot, at the Kmart site, eventually extending all the way down to connect up with the fairgrounds where there could be some additional parking.
Why aren't you going down Civic Center Drive toward Jim's point about not burdening an already overburdened street?
We've got some other options that look at different
One of
paths.
the biggest challenges with creating a peripheral parking reservoir that's connected by a circulator is that you've got this sort of binodal demand. So you're bringing people in from the northwest, they're going to park there, they're going to want to go to St. Mary's, and they're going to want to go downtown to Discovery Square, heart of the city. There's certainly only so many ways that you can hit both of those, and we've got some options that split that market out, but from an operational standpoint, if you're putting a lot of money into headway, it's better if you can hit both at the same time.
So the idea of doing something like a streetcar, which is more expensive, dictates that you have fewer options. You have more flexibility. So for instance, if we want to differentiate core clinic versus St. Mary's, it would be better to have a more flexible option.
Yeah. I guess if you just think about this, if people are parking here, they get on a circulator and then they come in here, but they're going here, then you're turning back on yourself.
But, yeah.
So this is an option, one option of many that tries to hit both those markets in a relatively direct fashion.
But for headways, if you instead went with a cheaper transit solution, they get there faster, and you're not burdening every place.
Yeah, but we need to be careful not to confuse capital costs, which is what it costs to build the project, and then operational costs. So operating costs is typically the heavier lift, because that's local money. So if you're if you're operating this at 5-minute service, and then you decide, okay, we're going to split, we're going to operate this at 5-minute service and this at 5-minute service. Even if the capital cost is cheaper, your operating cost is going up. So not that you can't do that, but there's trade-offs.
And the operating cost is long-term.
Right.
Your capital cost is a big thing to swallow, but once you get it down, it's down. The operating cost is with you for the rest of your life. The other question I have is, we talk about moving off of Second, and I think the idea of trying to serve the 2 markets from one location, there's merit to that, but if you do that, how are you getting in between? I mean, that's one of the 3 markets that we're trying to meet, so you just have to keep, if we create a vacuum in here, we still got to fill it somehow.
So just quickly on the city loop, the only things that are a little different on this one is we are also trying to figure out, the original concept came down 11th, so we were trying to look at options either of 12th or 13th, of trying to push the city loop further to the west to provide better access over to the kind of the main entrance places into the St. Mary's campus. Also, the original concept is following the old rail corridor, and thinking that may be quite a long-term term before that actually becomes available. So this concept is just taking the city loop onto First Avenue right next to it as a connection with the ultimate desire of making that other connection work.
So the other thing I'll just point out from where our destinations are. So we're also, if you pull the circulator and stretch it out a little bit, we also have the option of, as parking needs increase, extending that circulator further south to some additional remote parking and really kind of covering a broader geographic area.
Right. And this is up and into a rail corridor, and that, can't say that also could happen this way as well, to continue that up to the northwest,
et cetera.
up to the IBM area.
So remembering in all of these two green lines that Charlie pointed out, the PTN operating on Broadway and on Second. So again, as it talks.
That's the existing bus service?
Yes.
Where-
Primary transit
Primary
network.
transit
So
network.
basically bus rapid transit.
Uh-huh.
Operating on those corridors and again, being able to supplement this, maybe providing the initial service. These are 3 blocks away, but they're 3 short blocks, 3rd Avenue and Broadway.
So this isn't, is this now?
No,
This
no,
is in the
it's coming.
plan,
It's
that's
com-
in that
right,
plan.
it's
It's the
coming.
no build.
That's in the
Yep.
no build, the
Yes.
original, the.
I just wanted to remind
okay.
people that that's in part of the base of all of these options.
Could we call no build base? Because it implies that, this is gonna happen no matter what, right?
This is gonna happen.
Okay, so if this is gonna happen,
That would be
if
helpful.
that's gonna happen no matter what.
Yeah.
But if that's the case,
what
if
the
the
city
base
was
is
gonna
that,
do anyway.
why do we even need that? Wouldn't we cut costs by just ending it there? Because all of this seems to be redundant to that. Oh, there's this little river thing, isn't there? That's a problem.
Yeah, again, I think
Well, there it is.
it's about, it's going to be about service and capacity and duration of operations. So if we had, say, 4,000 cars we were parking down at the fairgrounds, if you're trying to serve that volume of folks, say, at between 4 and 5 in the afternoon, and you're trying to do that on essentially an arterial BRT service, you might be overwhelming that. But that's part of what those numbers are and what we need to operate and serve those functions is, again, analysis that will be ongoing over the forthcoming months.
What, let's just say that was a streetcar. That's unbelievably expensive. That's, how many millions is that little loop? That's a lot. I would ask you to look at the capacity that was able to be gotten on Marquette and Second by doing staggered stops.
Yep.
And operationally, that's cheaper enough. That's a lot of money we could save. And that, it's a real logical thing. The only thing you lose is that. You don't lose that.
Right.
Or that.
And that's one of the things we'd be looking at, particularly comparing the streetcar option with the BRT alternative. Because particularly, you don't want to build a streetcar that just only operates, is only designed to serve a remote parking location. It has a peak in the morning and a peak in the afternoon. As you mentioned, it's between $60 and $80 million a mile to build. And not only that, after you build it, you're going to operate it. So there's that. It's both the capital and the operating costs. So that's one of our criteria.
Well, doesn't that argue, you're thinking about introducing the time element into this, doesn't that argue to not be bound by a fixed line? Because this may be a rush hour direction and this may be a commuter, like after 6 direction, and you could shuffle them all around. Having a fix ties us to a strategy when I think at different times you would want different routes.
I think the word trade-off has come up many times already this morning, and that's one of the issues. And when we talk about using transit to induce development and TIF a project, the two things that will entice private investment are the quality of the service and the permanence of the service. I'm not going to put my money in something that might be gone tomorrow. So you'll put more money into something like a tram, but you're also more likely to attract the private sector investment and the more intense development. If you go to Portland's commuter rail line, they had the advantage, I think they had a 35-acre site that was a former rail site, so they had a huge area that could be redeveloped at the same time, but I know it's what, 12-story plus condos, apartments in general, that would not be there, but more than likely, at least they wouldn't be 10 or 12 stories without the streetcar.
I've made that argument over and over, and I get it, but when you really think about this, we're not having a whole lot of trouble attracting development on Second. Because a lot of people want to be in the Mayo Clinic in St. Mary's. We've had different developments down here. So it's not like the Pearl District in Portland, which was certainly, that would be more like this.
I should point out, the master plan for Mayo down Second, this is all hospitality home directed, as we've already done already, so it's not pretty low density, but that has kind of been what our master plan, so for certain lots, that meets a patient demand for a long-term stay.
I think this is pretty open, or a pretty important discussion, however, because, you know, lots of times when you're looking at the trade-off between bus rapid transit and a tram, or, you know, which is obviously a little bit more expensive, one of the main reasons why lots of people end up going to a tram or something that's a little bit more capital intensive is because of attracting that development, the intent to want to do more of that. And so if that's, there's lots of other reasons why people choose that, but I think that's an important element that we want to hear your thoughts on, because that'll help us in pinpointing the modes that we should be spending time looking at and the ones that maybe we don't.
So are we trying to get growth on Second?
Well, and I think the other question is, do you need some sort of a trolley or tram in order to attract that development, to your point?
I think the issue is that the most important thing is to create an amenity for the commuter to park a little further away. But I don't think there's a development growth need here. There is in here and over here, but
there's plenty of development.
But you have
demand
ridership,
here.
you have ridership demand here all day long.
yes, it's ridership
Right.
demand, but we
Yeah.
shouldn't be making the decision on where we want to do development. You know, I started this whole
Correct.
thing by saying, let's think about where we want to grow. This, you know, there's not a whole lot of growth you want to do in
I
there.
think the growth is more evidenced
Or you-
by the
you
dash
understand
line on
that.
this map. The redevelopment of the Third Avenue corridor as a transit-oriented type development, we think is a really a viable option. And so we don't know when it'll happen down here. And we don't know, maybe that dash line should start here and not here at Ninth. But we really think that there's great opportunity. We've already seen 2 redevelopment projects in this corridor already. One that's under construction, one that was built several years ago. I see more and more of that occurring. And so we think there's great opportunity there.
So I think for this corridor, I mean, the growth's on the ends, and then there's that piece that Doug points out, there's not a lot of room for
Not a lot of-
development, there's gonna be a
pretty
little
soft
bit
in
of
between,
infill.
point to point.
But that's also, I mean, that's where the demand exists today. I mean, you could build something like a streetcar there today and effectively fill it up with the demand that's already happening in that corridor. So, I mean, given that demand, what you want to provide there is the reliability and the frequency.
Yep.
I think there is actually a lot more development opportunity along Second Street than one might recognize. If you walk down that corridor, as I have many
That's
times and
true.
taken photographs, there's a
I
lot
just drove down it, yeah.
of low-density, obsolete, there's a lot of room for development. I'm not arguing for a mode, but I do want to say there's a lot of opportunity along Second Street that hasn't been
Yeah, I mean,
fulfilled.
if you look at cities like the Minneapolis, St. Paul, or cities in the Northwest where you've got these older streetcar neighborhoods that only have half a block of redevelopment, and they're doing 4/1 or 5/1 style development, they're packing out a lot of, it's a lot of units, it's a lot of density, that's a lot of activity in a linear sense.
Right.
All right, so I'm going to move us down to the next scenario, and I just want to make sure we cover everything before 11, being respectful of your time. So this is really great conversation.
Well, I think a lot of the conversation will apply to all
It will
of the scenarios,
apply.
yeah.
So the DMC modified scenario is really looking at a circulator that was looking to serve both an east-west and a north-south market. We were pulling that a little more east-west. With scenario B, we're pulling that a little more north-south now, as you can see. Starting at the same area here, but instead of dropping down to Second Street, we're continuing along the Civic Center corridor to 4th Avenue and then dropping down, hitting the University of Rochester area, and then cutting over again with New Bridge and hitting that same 3rd Avenue corridor. So rather than coming down and overburdening that Second Street corridor, now we're looking at orienting it more north-south. And again, in this scenario, we're also kind of looking at a BRT, an at-grade BRT opportunity. How we've then connected this area back with St. Mary's is to look at a subterranean transit corridor. And it's probably a soft transit as opposed to not so much buses, not so much hard rail, but looking at an opportunity where maybe we can use autonomous vehicles in a dedicated subterranean fashion to move that, folks who want to travel that distance out to St. Mary's.
Like the one that out at in DC that goes to the Senate building, to use it?
Could be, I haven't been in that particular facility. I don't know if anybody else here is.
Which one, Jim?
The one that
In DC.
Go to the House and the Senate.
Right.
From the
Oh.
the railroad.
Essentially-
You hop in and it just goes boom.
I'm just saying, how practical is it? We're gonna dig a mile-long tunnel?
Yes.
Come on.
Well, these are ideas that are being
But
explored.
it would be more of a PRT service, because that trip between the two campuses is more an individual trip. I mean, it's a patient and their companion. It's a doctor and an assistant. It could be served by the autonomous vehicle capacities ranging from 6 to 12. It doesn't need to be a streetcar that has capacity for 50 people.
No, that's what that thing is out there in DC. That's exactly what that thing is. I mean, I don't know what, it's gonna cost a lot of money, but that's what that thing is out in DC. You get on it, it goes boom. You get on it the other end, it goes boom. And you got 4 or 6 people.
It is the thing that talking about, but one of the things is, we can learn a lot from airports on this. Airports are dealing with big things, and they don't actually need any vehicle. What they do is a moving sidewalk. The one in Atlanta, you go through and they have a rainforest you go through, or this or that, but you've got a subway system here already, and it would be a hell of a lot cheaper to do that. But are there water issues under there? Can you
Those are all things we're exploring right now. So right now, these scenarios are really at the what if, why not. We did think about moving sidewalks, but the volume of people that want to make this trip, the speed of a moving sidewalk, and then also thinking about people who have disabilities or maybe have other needs, the moving sidewalk just wasn't feeling like the right mode where we can use a smaller autonomous vehicle that almost approaches a PRT-like experience.
So that issue is dealt with in airports, they must do some. Is there some way to recognizing the physical limitations of people here? Much like grocery carts are at the Target, 2-story Target connected, is there a way that actually patients who are being taken, I mean, you save a boatload by not having it in vehicles. If a moving sidewalk is mega millions less, so you could do at least something.
Right, although the.
Both the moving sidewalk, and you have space for the golf cart that goes for those that can't navigate
Right.
like in the airport.
You could do that, but basically you're widening the tunnel to do that, which, of course, the bigger the tunnel, the more expensive it is, the more likely you are to hit
The
utilities.
moving sidewalk is smaller than the vehicle. The moving sidewalk with the additional
But
part
have you
is
seen
probably equal distance.
the current autonomous vehicles are, they're a very narrow vehicle. I mean, it's including the sides of the moving sidewalk, they're probably comparable in terms of the width. Frankly, I think the cost of either one of them is going to be substantial. But in looking at the trade-offs, I think it would be, it appears to us that the small autonomous vehicles are probably less costly than the putting in a moving sidewalk. And actually, we are developing we have a cost for a moving sidewalk. We're also looking at the cost of the autonomous vehicles.
I know we can deal with this when you get the dollars, but just walk me through the logic on that, because why is it cheaper to build a vehicle?
Well, I don't know if it's cheaper, but I mean, the one thing, and I don't know what it's gonna cost a boatload of money, I give you that. But I mean, you're talking about patients probably you're gonna talk about employees mostly, but you're gonna be talking about patients that really don't wanna stand on a moving sidewalk. I mean, or can.
Okay.
I mean, I think that, I'm not Mr. Space Age guy here, but that thing moving back and forth, that is a slick deal out of the capital.
Yeah. What's the ballpark?
It's expensive.
Mile-long tunnel. I mean, compared to the entire transportation.
I don't know if it begins with a B.
I mean, no, it doesn't.
Well, come back to us with a number.
Yeah, we'll come back with that.
Right.
So what you see though is you don't see that dark blue line. So all the issues we had with
Right.
the multiple modes up on the surface at Second Street, you don't see that in
Separate
this
them
one,
out.
because now we aren't taking away a dedicated lane for a tram or for elevated, so.
Right. So there might be other road improvement costs for saving, et cetera. So
It's trade-offs.
these are just scenarios to ask the what ifs and why nots.
Could we just go back to the part of this we haven't talked much about, which is the big shift here, is this over to here. And so you lose St. Mary's, which is a big fucking deal, but you pick up, you put it where I think the development, we want to encourage more development over here. I mean, yeah, you're right, Patrick, there's definitely growth in here, but over here, if the net, because this is, I think, going to grow a lot because of where it is already. There's definitely stuff to fill in. But to me, this would be the incremental place that we could see growth that we couldn't otherwise. We lose
Correct.
it
One of
there.
the things I note about this, I think you're right about that, RT, but if you look at the line of the development district, which is where we're focusing our resources and effort, a third of this is outside of the development district. Now, we have to figure out how to connect this with the world outside of the development district. But this strikes me, I mean, this is, I think you're absolutely right. This is sort of the key issue here in terms of the trade-offs between overloading this street versus creating a new artery where you're trying to then, like how much energy is going to go into development. And I'm not familiar with what street this is. I don't even know what it looks like. I'm not very good with
Civic Center Drive.
So this is Civic
Yeah.
Center, but so it's not
Right.
going on Civic Center
No,
Drive.
it's in a separate.
It's in a separate corridor.
It's actually the rail corridor.
It's in the
just
rail
north.
corridor.
I believe that's the rail corridor.
This is Civic Center Drive here,
Right, yeah.
and this is the
Right.
rail corridor.
So it would be like in a separate, it would actually be kind of separate from where the development is.
Seventh
is just north of Civic Center Drive, I believe, but it's actually in the rail corridor, this old rail corridor. Yep, so
The
between
use
Civic
of
Center and
tax increment growth off of this to pay for this would be the cost benefit.
And then just do a TIF district that was that big.
Yeah.
That includes Civic Center Drive.
Yeah, because this is a pretty logical thing. It's, hey, build your housing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera here, and you walk downstairs and you get there. It's a pretty cool deal. And then you start to figure out how to
Okay,
figure
we hadn't got to this one yet.
Okay.
But this is the trade-off of Second Street, making Second Street one lane in each direction instead of two, dedicating a lane for transit, whether it's at the surface or elevated. And so you're moving 9,300 vehicles off of Second Street for the day. Daily. And those would go up to 6,500 increase on Civic Center Drive.
That's if you had their, I'm sorry, I'm just not understanding what
So
this
you're
is.
making two one-ways?
Help me explain this.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yep.
I missed the question, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just trying to understand, is this assuming that you're building a transitway on Second?
We're taking away a lane to build.
To build transit.
So if you did something like this.
Right.
It would mean relocating 9,300 cars a day and 6,500 would move over there. So then what's the flip of?
That's what I'm trying to understand.
This requires a six-lane Civic Center Drive then.
Okay.
To accommodate that additional 6,500.
So this is a big honking deal.
So, I mean, it's this trade-off of things.
But then you have a different trade-off over here.
Could, we didn't look at that. Which way would
You
you go?
could also do this
Yeah.
without taking a lane, a mixed
Why
lane
would
of
you go
traffic.
backwards?
You could do that, but I mean, your sacrifice is travel time reliability, slower moving vehicles, but you could do that.
And just one last thing about that assumption that we had, that was a 2040 no build, so it's assuming all the parking is still in downtown. There's another way of kind of mitigating it by putting parking in different spots.
That graphic.
Yes, correct.
One of the nice things about this is you can start to think about what are, because if you build something like this you can't build it all at once. You have to think of a core line, and then, do I understand the pinch point right, that it's bad now, but it's not critical now? Meaning, could this be phase 1, and this be phase 2, or does this need to happen right away?
So Pat's pulling up a graphic here that will show us that at some points of the day, it is critical now. And then it's just going to become increasingly critical over time.
You're doing a great job, by the way. So what's representing here is it's a 90-minute period during the AMT period. And this is that, I said, maybe 45 minutes where it's full. You can see then it kind of drops back. That orange is the extra. Blue is the cars that are kind of taking up the capacity. Orange is what's reserved over a 90-minute period between, I think it's 7 and 8:30. 7:15 to 8:45. So there's a little bit, but it's pretty full for about 45 minutes coming in there in the morning.
So if I offer one thing as well, RT said something earlier, which one of his comments was, is that it's the time of day. I don't know if you quite use time of day. Maybe I interpreted that, but it's very critical. I mean, that's the key point here. Is this ends up being a bit of a commuter employee issue versus client patient visitor issue, which are possibly at different times of the day. So that profile across the day is going to need to be taken into consideration as well. And those folks that are on the park once philosophy that come in as a commuter or an employee from 5 miles to somewhere outside of 5 miles from the community and park their car one time, leave it there all day, take up our parking capacity, impact our portal capacity during one of the most key time frames of the day. Well, how can we manage that, mitigate it, minimize it, so that it doesn't overly or negatively affect us during those peak times, but still allows us parking capacity and otherwise for our visitors, our patients, our customers, to do business throughout the day.
It would seem to me, if we're trying to make a strategy here to move forward, and this is just me, the strategy would be get more park and ride people for these people coming in from Northwest. Figure out some place to make them park and ride, whether it's out in Walmart, out in West Circle Drive. That alleviate some of this. I actually like coming down Civic Center Drive, and I know that my compadre at Mark Hickey, because the city's going to pay for that little thing under 2nd Street, but that's the deal. I mean, if you're thinking, outside the box, that's the deal to have. You got to get people off of 2nd Street. Well, if they're in a personal rapid transit thing under the street, it's expensive. Once you have it built, I mean, that gets people off the street. Then you can put some bike lanes and pedestrian. And you're going to get more cars coming down this way, and if you have them park and ride, it's a time issue. It's at the beginning of the day. So that's the one I like, for what it's worth.
So I think you're right, and what's interesting about this is trying to figure out, okay, if that's our #1 issue on timing for a number of years, then the question would be, you want to make this as small as possible. The more expensive the work. So this isn't as important as this. So it was, to answer that question then, this would be really cool to build first, not the bridge, but to there, so you can try those two things together. But because that's the critical issue, instead of building that, you would want to build that. Focus everything there.
I would agree with that.
And this scenario with a BRT system, we have the flexibility to start, expand, build. Now I'm going to move us along to scenario C, okay? Scenario C takes a different approach. It is a grade separated approach, but now we're looking at something that's elevated. And when we're starting to talk about an elevated system, now we lose some of that ability to incrementally build something, because if you're going up in the air, you kind of have to build it a very functional element all at once. It becomes more challenging to add on in the future. Well, because at least you need to get a terminal facility for your vehicles at either end. And, sort of the remobilization cost to come in and build another, it's not that you can't, it's just in terms of efficiency.
The piece of the capital cost is where it begins and ends. And as long as you're paying, the rail isn't as expensive as the terminal.
Yes, to some degree, and then just the whole mobilization cost of building an elevated structure. You wouldn't want to come in every 5 years and building another 3 blocks of elevated structure. It just would be
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Seattle's experience of having a super short one was not that great because it went from nowhere to nowhere.
Right, right.
This is really different because it's going from somewhere to
Right.
somewhere. You wouldn't necessarily need to do anything bigger.
Okay, so what we're looking at here, and again, we're looking at something elevated, again, trying to capture those commuter vehicles, perhaps here at Civic Center Drive, potentially could expand out to the east to 1452. So this is a little bit fuzzy in terms of exactly optimally where you would want to bring that, again, because our cost here is, we've got a long distance here. This could theoretically be at grade, even though it might be an AGT type system. AGT would be like a monorail or something where you've got a vehicle that runs on a dedicated track.
Start at grade and then go up?
Like the airport.
Like the airports.
Right.
So, yeah, this could be at grade and then eventually work its way up into the air. But you're starting at the north end of town. This particular concept is addressing that sort of St. Mary's versus downtown versus Civic Center markets that we were talking about, those geographic markets, by actually operating two different lines. You could think of an A line that started here and then went to St. Mary's and came back, and a B line that started here and went to the Civic Center via University of Rochester and came back, both along 4th Street. So we're running two different service lines. I think somebody had suggested that before. That does sort of add to both your operational costs and your capital costs initially because you're building those two separate lines. But again, we would be at probably 20, 24 feet above grade. So you're separating that from vehicular traffic, kind of looking at diluting some of that roadway space that you need. But you are elevated, so you're traveling then at the second, third story of some buildings. There may be some visual impacts. You may have shaded areas underneath that you might need to invest a little bit more to make them attractive pedestrian ways. But this kind of elevated system, particularly if you think about St. Mary's to the Gonda building, is not unlike what's in Indianapolis at their medical center as well.
So what's the street experience like when I've never been to Indianapolis or seen it. If you're on the street and that is over you, what does it feel like?
It feels like there's a narrow roadway overhead. So the one in Indianapolis, and you can go on Google Map if we could bring it up, but we certainly will have some images in the future. But about a 6-foot diameter pier holding up a, 15-foot wide, approximately 15, 16, 20, somewhere in there.
For both, considering both directions, for this stretch, we'd have two guideways anyway, it would probably be closer to 30.
Right.
I wasn't
So-
in Indianapolis. Was it attractive? Because I was out in Seattle and that was unattractive.
Seattle was built 50 years, I mean, it's a
Well,
different.
the one thing to keep in mind with Seattle is it's a true monorail, so it's two concrete beams, which are only about 3 feet wide each. So what you're talking about now is a concrete slab, which has a heck of a lot more girth than Seattle.
And what was not attractive to me out in Seattle was, and I mean, it was kind of a maintenance thing. I mean, there was slime and green and goo, and if you're walking underneath it, I mean, it was drippy, it was really super pleasant.
Disney might be a better example, because
Yeah.
Disney has stuff like this all over the place, but I haven't been to Disney. And the monorails, everybody talks about Disney because we've all been there, what most people don't think about. Disney, it's a loop. It's a lot easier to work a monorail in a loop than it is to have turns.
Back and forth.
Yeah.
And we've kind of focused on the AGT or the people mover. The other option here is an autonomous vehicle. And when we started this project, autonomous vehicles weren't even on the list. You could build, if you built this as an autonomous vehicle, you no longer have A trains and B trains. Basically, this is, it's a bridge that's, so I get on, not during, I won't spend a lot of time on this unless somebody wants to talk to me afterwards, but I don't get on an A train or a B train. I get on
Right now, the vehicles are about 12 passenger. I think in 5 years, they'll have 25 passenger, 30 passenger. There's so much money going into to autonomous vehicles. It's going to happen, period. So I could get in a vehicle and I just get in a vehicle, it would take me here, and another vehicle would go here on the same guideway. They just get to an intersection and they turn. So you don't have to have dedicated guideways for an A train and a B train.
Do you need a guideway at all? Can you just use the road?
You could use the road. The main issue, in fact, I would say for all the BRT options, we ought to be thinking of them as BRT/autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So the advantage of being up in the air is you have a much higher, you have reliability and you have speed. So does it have to be elevated? No. If you're looking for something that's different, that makes Rochester different, we're actually working on a project in Jacksonville right now that started about 2 months ago. They have an elevated people mover. They were one of the 3 cities that built them in the 80s. We are redesigning it for them because they're taking the AGTs off and converting it to autonomous vehicles.
So I want to I have been holding back on this comment because I didn't want to be a big buzzkill. Here it comes.
We have one more to go.
I know, I think it'll apply. I mean, as somebody who spends a lot of time in the political world, it is so obvious to me right now that there is virtually no political will for spending money on rail at all, either at the federal level or certainly at the state level, where we're getting written into bills, you by no means spend this money on anything that looks like a rail or smells like a rail. And so, things can change, but my political judgment suggests that that's not going to change substantially for the next 4 years at least. And so, and I think, what is it going to look like 20 years from now? I mean, I've got to believe that this autonomous vehicle technology is going to be where we will be, particularly if you don't have, if you have a built-out system, then that's one thing. And maintaining that system and the value of that system, I can really see. But I'm going to be really pushing us to think about that as and each one of these is essentially, this is a mode question, not a route question that I'm raising. But
right,
yeah. I
think we do have
just
to be
the reality.
realistic about it. As somebody who's been talking streetcar all
right.
this, I'm just really worried about how that gets handled.
I think the bigger trade-off in my mind, I totally agree with you in terms of political will, nationwide and probably here as well. I think probably the bigger question and one that's good to focus on as we talk about this alternative is where the guideway is. No matter what type of vehicle is, who's driving it, or if nobody's driving it. If it's 30 passengers or 12, I think the bigger trade-off in my mind is there grade separation, and what does that mean for the passenger experience, the commuter experience, the visitor experience, or is it operating at the surface, which inevitably means it's crossing intersections, it's got potential for delay with traffic. And so, think about what we're trying to do here, which is, bringing thousands into park, and also potentially finding a place for the commuter bus terminal, which may be, we may be talking about 100 commuter buses in the peak delivering multiple thousands of people who are currently getting rides to their front door.
Right.
If they land there and get on a BRT or a bus that's then creeping through in mixed traffic and getting stuck behind people turning to park, and they're trying to get from here to here, that's a significant degradation in their experience, and then we might well be pushing them back into their car. If they get here, and then, they're on an elevated system, it's boom, 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 boom. They're there. If they get here and they're on the surface and dedicated right away, that's somewhere in between.
So let's explore this for a second. Where do we really need to get them? Let's now introduce the Skyway and the subway system into it, and what is a practical walk for people? So this is a traditional way of getting all the way through. But, let's just say, where's Peace Plaza from here? Oh, okay.
Right in here.
Yeah. So if we were bringing people to here, maybe here, but probably here, that's probably enough. And cutting out all of that, maybe I'm wrong here, but where's Discovery Square would sit down here? And
Discovery Square is right here.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, if we really worked in this philosophy that we need to solve this problem first, so now we're, get to that later. I'm just making this up, but I'm making it up based on facts, I think. That if this is the thing, that if we just focus on this, then we're really trying to deal with this area here. We're cutting off a couple more blocks. And that's, it's starting to get interesting because then this is within the destination. This could be a tax increment district. And because people can walk 2 blocks. It's, and that's, that's definitely a transportation thing within a subway or a skyway.
What about the people coming here and going to St. Mary's?
Well, I would argue that the St. Mary's people should be addressed here and here. It's a different issue. That if we really micro-targeted these issues, that the St. Mary's thing should be a separate deal. I mean, there can be a way to get here from this thing, and you can make your choice. You're going downtown or...
But we also have a movement in between these 2 locations to the degree of minimum of 5,000 people every day who are bouncing.
Well, one of the things you could do would be to start limiting some of the car traffic during commuting hours and just have your bus that. Or the underground
clinic has
thing.
a bus that runs between the campuses. I mean, that bus,
already happened.
That's happened for years. And maybe you have to accentuate that some more, but you need to think, people that are getting to St. Mary's, there's 2 groups of people, big groups, the employees, and they're coming in at 7 and 3. The other people are the patients, you gotta worry about the patients, so.
They're coming here.
Right.
That.
Archie, I like your idea though. It's just like in Minneapolis. Once you get to the Skyway, you're kind of
You're
in.
in.
I mean, it all gets to be climate controlled. Once you're climate controlled, people will walk, I think.
Yeah.
When you need to be.
There is the plan is a peripheral parking system, and it got screwed up by people agreeing to let parking go into the core of it.
Sure.
But if that was the same sort of strategy, and you've already got parking in the car, so that's not a real issue.
Yeah, 20 years ago, I was parked on Washington, right by the depot. It's a cheap circus lot. Once you got to the gateway ramp, you're in, and you didn't mind walking 10 minutes.
Right.
The other thing we haven't talked about on the autonomous vehicles is that on the elevated option, it really substantially expands our capabilities because it's not just an enclosed system. You put a ramp. You have a controlled access ramp at each end, so you don't have to build an elevated anything out here. You could just it could be 2 lanes of pavement, inbound and outbound, and you jump into the guideway where you need to have the separation from the street. And depending on how wildly you want to think about autonomous vehicles, maybe I think a difference with an elevated autonomous vehicle. And I'm not saying this is the option, but they're electric vehicles. It's not like the Chicago L, and it's just this old thing, and you hear the almost vibrate as it goes over you. This is a rubber tire, and thinking really outside of the box. In 10 years, maybe there's a couple of 30 passenger autonomous vehicles that come in and out from Owatonna instead of a 50 passenger bus that comes in. And you don't come into a transit center and force a transit. You come in and you get on the guideway and you're separated from the traffic and it takes you where you want to go. Maybe one of the buses from Owatonna is coming here, the other one is coming here. So I mean, there's just an incredible amount of flexibility. With I won't say there's no risk because we don't know what's around the corner, but my sense is there is so much money coming into. I mean, in 5 years we're going to have driverless cars. Not everybody's going to have one, but they're going to be in the market.
All right, we're at 11 o'clock. I'm just going to touch on this quickly, and then I'm going to invite us all to sit down at the table, and we'll just cover a couple of things and wrap up to be respectful of your time. So transit scenario number D, again, we're talking about variations on a theme. The key issue here is we're, again, more east-west with an at-grade version of transit, but instead of continuing this way and continuing on 2nd Street and then heading south, we're scooting south before Discovery Square, so kind of hitting the Gonda Discovery Square area, heading down to University of Minnesota, and then coming up and touching the Civic Center facility itself, which in some of the scenarios was felt to be, maybe we were lacking that connection to that one destination.
Just a clarification, so this would be at grade up to Civic Center Drive, and then this would be an elevated.
Oh, that is, sorry, apologies, that's correct. Correct, in my haste. So you do all have this matrix at your table which gives a little more verbal description of what you saw in the concepts themselves. And we're continuing to tweak these, and we'll consider the comments that we got from you all today. And let's sit down at the table then, because we're going to talk about where we're going with these.
I've been kind of holding my comments to the end, but I want to echo what Tina said. You know, it's 2017, so I mean, I know in the beginning we kind of had head in the clouds, dreaming. At this point, I'm a little concerned about the amount of staff time and consultant time spent on some of these more exotic solutions that I don't really think are going to be practical, digging mile-long tunnels, elevated trains or elevated. I think long-term, I think it's been touched on here. Autonomous vehicles are a long-term. I mean, that's where we're going. And bang for the buck, at-grade autonomous vehicles are going to give us the most bang for the buck. So the interim solution is some kind of rubber tire-based system, BRT, a circulator based on that. Because again, I don't know about 5 years, but certainly within the lifetime of this plan, autonomous vehicles are going to be the backbone. And to tie ourselves into some kind of elevated fixed system or rail system, I just think is short-sighted. At-grade is going to give us the most bang for the buck. So I really would like to see that kind of focus on our planning efforts. That's just my thoughts.
Okay. So we can just quickly sit down and...
Okay, see you later.
Thanks.
All right, so the couple of things that I want to touch on here before we leave, and I've lost my agenda packet somewhere. Somewhere along the way, I've been carrying papers. We do have in mind at the very last page of your packet, you'll see a graphic that looks like this, all right? So where we are today, you can look at April of 2017. We have 6 options plus a no build. What we are on the path to doing is bringing some more information to this. The study teams are addressing some of the concerns that you raised as we walked around the table. We will have those deliverables in May. We are also planning to do a public open house in May and display these scenarios with some of the information that we're learning. And through that process, and likely touching again with both you, the DMC board, and the city council, narrowing those options down to 3. Now, this has been a very high-level sort of analysis that we're going through at this point. Then over the summer of those 3, we'll be doing much more intense analysis and a little more design consideration. That work will be done in September. And at that time, then we'll enter a process in the fall where we again go out to the public, we bring that information to you as well as the city council, and our goal will be to arrive at a single preferred alternative or preferred option for how we're going to move forward with all these by the end of 2017. So that's sort of the path that we're on. That's also reflected in this milestone chart, which you've seen several versions of as we've come through and done various iterations. As we go through this process, we are applying some criteria that we've referenced now several times throughout the day. Tom, I don't know if you just want to touch at that at a high level, or how much time you want to spend on that?
Do we have like 2 minutes? 2 minutes, okay. So I've worked on a number of these sort of larger integrated multimodal transportation efforts that are tied back to bigger goals, as is obviously the case with the DMC. We've got a real economic development mission here. As we see from the discussions we just had, it's pretty easy to kind of get into the minutia of the transportation logistics. So we want to be sure as we're going through this process that we're tied back to the overall mission of the DMC. And so sort of what we've created as a structure for the team is an evaluation framework. The process we used, it's something that Transport for London developed. It's called the multiple account evaluation framework. It sounds big and fancy, but the idea is pretty simple in concept, that we want to do sort of value-driven planning and evaluation. So we've essentially kind of created 4 what we're calling evaluation accounts. Oh, you can pass those around, yeah. that tie back to the goals of the DMC plan, and we're talking about those as economy or economic development, health and wellness. Obviously, this is about creating a healthy community. It's about providing health care, so that's critical. And then community and experience too. We're actually trying to build neighborhoods. We're trying to build community. As you pointed out at the beginning, RT, really the vision of the DMC plan was to create a dense, integrated, urban community. That's really, the thing about the DMC is its urbanity beyond what you'd expect in this part of the world. Really, that's kind of the central idea to attracting development, attracting people, and bringing people to Rochester. So we want to make sure that we're capturing that. Then we've got a fourth account that we're calling deliverability, and that's sort of the catch-all for things like cost effectiveness. How many people are we serving for the amount of money we're spending on capital and operating when we're talking about transit. So all those things that tie back to, can we fund it, can we build it, is it feasible? So we've been using this framework as the different teams go through their processes to sort of organize our thinking around evaluation. So, as Doug's transit team's thinking about transit alternatives, I'm sort of trying to force him to slot his evaluation criteria into these accounts as an organizing framework. As we're working on parking, we're working on the city. We're trying to use this organizing framework. Ultimately, what this does for you guys is when we come back and talk to you about narrowing the alternatives, we come back to you and talk about the evaluation of the three alternatives that go through a more detailed evaluation process. We're going to continue to be using this evaluation framework. So trying to provide you some structure so you can see how we're getting from the vision plan to alternatives to preferred solutions.
Okay.
Good. Madam Chair, can I ask a question of Richard? I'm just looking at the chart, and are you contemplating that the DMCC will have another work session at the end? When in May, or when is the next one? I guess it shows in the May column.
We're having a open house in May.
I'm looking at this one. Richard, I'm looking at this one.
Oh, okay.
And at the top of the May column, it says work session for DMCC. And I'm just trying to get in my mind what the next step is for the DMCC.
I don't think we were looking at a work session until August.
Well, we had talked, generally speaking, conceptually, about after we have the information from the public open house and have some comments, and narrowing the 6 definitively down to the 3 as we go into the open house. We probably will have 3 that we're saying these look like the front runners are the ones that are most reasonable. That we just do a check-in both with the DMCC board and with the city council at that time, so that as we're doing that narrowing from 6 down to 3. So that's kind of a placeholder at that time. If we want to do another workshop like this, if we want to, that's something I think that the process is open to right now. So we can have that conversation going forward about how we want to choreograph that.
Well, I'd suggest in the interests of time today that we should regroup to make sure that our board has the kind of the schedule and the capacity to jump in where we need to.
Especially the open house, is that scheduled yet?
So
we're looking at May 30th right now.
So we should. So we'll follow back up on that, colleagues, with everybody.
Could I pick up on the council member's point, because it was a real good one about like, what are we going to leave on the table or not? And one of the things we could be helpful about would be to take some things off the table. I would also argue that one of the things we should look at is that there are gradations in some of these. So for instance, if at this moment somebody like tied me to a post and said, you must decide what has to happen here, and then I would say, at this moment in time, I would like to focus on the idea of having the transit come down Civic Center Drive and come to near, but not all the way to, Peace Plaza. And to focus on that part, because that's where our transit challenge is, that's where we want growth to occur. That's what I would say. Now, to do that, to vet that, we need to figure out what is the tax increment district possibility beyond the boundary. And that's setting up a whole body of work with the city, because that has to be taxing everything. It would also be saying, can we wait a few years to address the issues to the south, so we could focus on the more critical ones to the north? Now, that depth of planning is different than saying we want to look at alternative one, which is, should we have transit coming down Civic Center Drive? I think we got to get beyond that pretty quick and start to dissect the pieces of these things that we want to do. Now, I think probably different than the council member, I would want to continue to vet a couple of the underground options on Second, not as an alternative to Civic Center Drive, but additive. I don't, from what is in front of me right now, see Second as being the solution that we have. I think we should also look in more detail at what the experience could be of having St. Mary's be a unique destination and have something in the Miracle Mile area where St. Mary's parked, and separate those two things. I'd also like to see us to really look at the ability to green up a street. Like, for instance, I'm sure the people in Kotzky Park would not be nuts about having people go from St. Mary's through their neighborhood by cars. But if we actually said we were going to create a much more park-like experience on some of their streets so that we could introduce walking into it, that may be a different thing. So that's like I think we need to get into the weeds further, and in return, take some things off. I personally, and Mayor, I think you ought to push back on this one, but I personally would probably remove the above grade ones, because the autonomous vehicle development is going to happen so fast and all of that I am worried about having a physical piece of infrastructure stuck on that. But that's just me talking. So what I think we should do is give these guys a little more guidance so we can take some of these things off. Of the Buck Rogers ideas, I want to keep on the idea of a moving sidewalk under Second in some way, but I don't know whether that makes any sense at all. That's just me sticking my finger in the air in the middle.
Pat, no?
I would just to pick up on what you're saying there. Early, at the beginning of this, Richard identified the 3 key markets that we're trying to solve for. And it might be useful to dissect this, whereby we are saying, what is the perfect solution for the market that is the St. Mary's to Gonda audience? Like, what's the perfect solution for that group?
Right.
And what's the perfect solution for the people coming in, the commuter? And what's the perfect solution
Right.
for the circulator, the people moving about? And in that way, I think you start to see where there are conflicts or where you can be efficient in matching up systems. Because one of the things I found quite helpful as you open that up with that, Richard, is as I was looking at each of these plans, I was thinking about it through that lens. But it might be worth it to parse that out, sort of separate that out, and then bring them back together.
So, Madam Chair, can I just go to that for a second? So, for instance, one of the things we could do would be at our next meeting, or as soon as possible, tee up the issue of Second versus Civic Center Drive as the macro transit solution. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, we did what my gut tells me right now we should do, is to say Civic Center Drive. Then we could come back with the idea. The second issue then is a very different one. It's not a mass commuter one. It's how to get from Gonda to St. Mary's.
Right.
And that can be on a totally different track.
Right.
And so that would allow us to focus on one of these two. And so not having to wait for the whole process, because it strikes me that's the key issue we got to decide first, is Second or Civic Center. Is that right? If we did that, wouldn't that help you a lot?
I'm looking at my team members here.
What would help you? What would help you narrow options so we can go deeper into the weeds on the ones we've got?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think it's really helpful to hear what you feel very passionately about. If you see some major fatal flaws with any of the things that we showed you today, it's good to know those things. So as we regroup as a team and take all of your feedback and kind of digest it and really understand what was said, we have some very clear salient points to say, okay, here's, if there are fatal flaws that we shouldn't be wasting any more time on, it's good to know from all the perspectives.
So let me push you further, because I really appreciate being listened to, but you guys are the pros, so you need to push back too. So tell us, what would be a decision that we could make earlier to accelerate this that would allow you to focus more deeply?
Well, I'm going to give you my opinion, and Patrick just mentioned it, the ability to uncouple these pieces. so that we can look at a service delivery model for St. Mary's employees that may be different than for the downtown Mayo campus and other downtown employees. That we can uncouple those. And whether it's there's something else I wanted to say now and I can't remember, but if you feel comfortable with that, we've been trying to keep them together because that's consistent with the plan. The plan basically had the circulator serving the 3 markets. I've personally been of opinion that the best may be 2 different ways to do that, but there's possibly, they each have their own separate way. So knowing that we can look at serving each of those major employee centers differently would help us a lot, because we aren't trying to keep everything tied together. And yet, we have to tie the 2 campuses together.
Right.
But that's basically from, help me here, Mayo staff, but 6 a.m. to 6 p.m.?
Yeah.
Okay?
And so just to be, and our job today is not to take scenarios off the table. Our job is to give you feedbacks that will help us get down to 3 scenarios. Is that right?
Correct.
So just as a for instance, I'm hearing I heard from this group a lot of passion around being practical about how much you can jam into second, into second. And even though that's what the development plan said we should do, I mean, I think this work session would suggest that that you don't need to present us with 3 scenarios that are only second. And then I also think that this, I heard also from our group, a really strong focus, I mean, maybe especially from Mark and me, but I mean, really from all of us, about being practical. So like big extra star next to delivery. You know, because I like the way you've laid out here these are essentially the criteria that we're going to want to look at as we figure out how to ultimately narrow down to 1 scenario and how to balance that all out. And, we want to be practical about this. That was the other thing I heard. And then I think this thing that you and RT you've been talking about all the way through RT, and Patrick was just raising, which is that maybe we really do need to think about each one of these audiences a little bit differently in order to maximize the benefit for the people that are, for the different places and purposes that people are coming into the core.
As long as Tom comes back with the point about operational, that
Right.
this is a town. Now, by the way, if we're talking autonomous, the operationals are less. They're not completely, but I do think that idea of figuring out, so the decoupling St. Mary's is really intriguing to me. But I don't know what that means.
Right. I don't know if that's a good idea, but we're at least saying, giving permission to look at that if you think it's a good idea. Right. And then RT, now's the perfect time to bring up your airport thing.
Oh, so I want to make a commercial that my wife and I got an unbelievably cheap fare. We were connecting out of Atlanta by flying out of Rochester. So we flew out of, it was the most wonderful experience. Delta, by the way, happened to screw us up by canceling the flight back, which required me to drive back and forth from the airport in Minneapolis. Other story. But I just think we should be really, really promoting that whole idea of flying out of Rochester and use it or lose it. It was not a full flight, and our flight back got canceled. And so now that we've got it, use it. And I think we ought to really push it to my neighbors who don't like all those flights over their head, and because that's a great experience. So I'm done with my commercial.
Which flight was not full?
The one coming back, the one going down to Atlanta was not. The one coming back was not full enough so that they canceled it and moved us from Saturday to Easter Sunday. I wasn't happy. All that being said, that's
pretty much 80%.
good, wonderful. So, Madam Chair, you're right. Our job isn't to take things off the table, but we do have the option to do it. So what if we said to them to do that they wouldn't do? Like, I think we ought to talk about the elevated thing for a second. But, maybe I'm pushing that question too much because we don't have the facts.
We don't
in front of us.
actually have the power to take anything off the table right here.
Yeah,
also.
nor do we have the facts. So.
Right. But I appreciate, though, I kind of agree with you. I think that maybe I do think that the political in the sort of delivery bucket, the political realities plus the financial realities really cause us to need to be practical as well as visionary. We don't have to be, like, that doesn't mean that we're sort of going, oh, we can't do anything. It means that we have to be able to really think about the technology of transportation in a different way. And you guys are way better suited to do that than I am.
I guess to your question, Mayor, about what would be helpful.
Right.
You know, I'm hearing that elevated might be, I think, you know, whether we keep that as an alternative or not is one thing, but I think, you know, we're hearing it's expensive, you know, there's impacts, so we need alternatives that focus on transit operations on the surface. Given that, I think the big question is, do we operate that transit in its own dedicated right-of-way on the surface? And therein lie a number of trade-offs. So I think one question for you guys to consider is, if we're creating, you know, high-quality transit circulation that's, you know, part of an experience that's going to get people out of their car, capture them at the periphery and get them to where they want to go, you know, doing that in a mixed traffic environment is going to make it difficult to deliver that kind of experience. So doing that in dedicated right-of-way then also comes with the trade-offs of repurposing limited right-of-way, which, you know, certainly has impacts on how other modes travel. So
which might push you more towards Civic Center.
yeah, so I think, you know, I think that's an area, you know, are there parts of the city where those trade-offs are more viable?
So one of the things then that, to give us the information, is what I hear you saying is headway matters. And I would put that in the larger context of, to get people to do something that's not logical, meaning to drive up to the front, you have to give them some advantage, transit advantage. So part of what we need to have you guys do is then think about what's the transit advantage. So as I think about this right now and think about the experience somebody has of parking within a few blocks of their place, that's a pretty cool thing. But I also think about January 17th on just a really, really frigid, where you're struggling through these 3 blocks and you're walking out there and you're thinking, why didn't I take that job at the Miami clinic, right? And so in that moment, one of the things we can do is we can give them a climate protected experience. Now, that would be nice to bury the whole parking ramp, but you can't do that. But you can at least create that experience. So what you need to come back with is, how do we create a more climate controlled, how is the experience better? So physical is part of it. Time, as you're introducing, is part of it. The reason I got to that point about can you have them walk a couple blocks is because the headway could be quicker if they didn't have to come as far into the core. So I think you've got to get us now into the weeds of all of that. And so it should be in, what is the transit advantage? Because we know the disadvantage, right? We're asking them to get out of their car and do something different. So what are the advantages?
I think those things like climate protection, we can control through design, you know.
Yeah.
That's obviously part of the experience. But once we get transit on the surface, that time and reliability piece we know is absolutely critical. And there's only so much we can do to control that. You know, and that's where the trade-offs lie. So I think, you know, I think a head nod from you guys that we would like to see alternatives that present that trade-off and show, you know, what transit operations on the surface in dedicated right-of-way look like.
So let me transition the conversation a little bit maybe to what do we want to show the rest of the board in April? Because asking that question, I would say maybe some of the most vocal board members who would argue against that trade-off are not present here today. So how much of this information at what detailed level do you think would be appropriate to share with the board at your April 27th meeting?
Well,
do you have some thoughts about that?
I'm just sort of starting to think about my time crunch right now. So, but I have to leave in about 5 minutes.
Yes.
So, I mean, my intention for the board meeting on the 27th, just broadly, was to do a report out of this discussion. I would probably look to those of you who are here to help me do that. In fact, you maybe, or T, if you'd be willing, you and I could do that together, and then do a report out on that. I think we have some small amount of time in the April board meeting to sort of have a discussion about this, but it's not like it's not a big part of our board meeting.
No, we actually now just have like 10 minutes or so, but if we need to change it.
Well, actually, we changed that to to delete that and make it under the chair's report.
Okay.
Obviously, we can still go either way.
Yeah, so we haven't finalized the agenda yet, but we have other business that we also have to do, so.
So in the 3.2 minutes left, let me throw a big thing into the thing. Let's put that up against the idea of making a decision on Civic Center Drive and Second at that meeting. Wouldn't that be cool to actually make a decision?
I would.
I have no idea whether that's possible. We won't solve it in 2 minutes.
I would suggest I would not feel that we had served you well in bringing you all the technical information to make that decision.
I mean, what I'm understanding, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but you've got you have this, what did you call it, the London situation, the London?
Oh, the multiple account analysis.
Multiple account analysis.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that you have some, with the feedback and the feedback that you'll get from us and from our colleagues and from the community and from the city council, that you'll put these scenarios through this analysis and give us some sort of an understanding of how they stack up. Is that how this would work?
Correct, yeah, correct.
And so we don't have to sort of make a judgment decision like right now.
Right.
What we do have to do is to give you good information about what we think is important, so that you can run that process in a way that, am I understanding that right?
So
Okay.
having the star around the practical implementation, that's helpful. Being able to think about, well, we don't have to be so closely married to what was in the DMC plan. We're open to thinking a little more broadly.
Right.
All of that kind of feedback is very, very helpful for us, so.
I just want
yes,
to make
thank
one
you for
comment
that.
on that point, because I think that's exactly right. The DMC plan, and Tom, you guys did it, was to get these audiences to move. We need to get them to move the right way. There's one scenario in there, but I think it would be crazy not to think about separate scenarios if those are the smarter modes of transportation. So I don't think we should marry ourselves to just one circulator and call it a day. I don't think that was the original intent, actually.
We probably all have.
Yeah. So I don't think we're going to be able to resolve at this moment exactly how we deal with the board meeting on the 27th, but I will be back in touch, Mayor, with you and with RT, and we'll figure out how to make that presentation so that, and we were going to meet and talk about the agenda, but now we're out of time, so we'll have to do that. We'll do that on a phone call or something, and we'll let you guys know. But thank you. This was extremely valuable. I really, really appreciate it, and I think I know I feel much better in touch with what the scenarios are and what the alternatives and the depth of analysis that you all are doing.
Yeah, really good, thanks.
Would it make sense for us to at least pick some dates to get on your calendar for future workshops? Because I found this, and I think the rest of the team found this very helpful too.
Yeah, I think we should do that very quickly. I agree with that. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.